Welcome, everyone. This is Rosalind Sedaka, and you're at WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. You're listening to Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living with Rosalind Sedaka. And as you know, I'm founder of the Child-Centered Divorce Network, and we provide support and guidance and coaching services for families before, during, and long after the divorce. And today we have a very special program. I'm going to be talking to an expert on men, on how men think and how men fit into the relationship equation for us, and especially those of us who've been through divorce and are looking to find new partners. We want to get as much insight as possible. So I want to introduce you to Dr. John Schinnerer. And Dr. John coaches clients to perform at their peak, from the boardroom to the bedroom, from work to relationships. Dr. John was an expert consultant for Pixar's Inside Out movie. He has coached thousands of men in areas such as work, performance, improving their marriage, stress, anxiety, purpose, and happiness. And his areas of expertise range from masculinity to high performance, to stretch management, to positive psychology, to creating happy, thriving relationships. And you could learn more about Dr. John by visiting him at guidetoself.com. And you'll be getting an opportunity to hear that again when we talk to him. So let me welcome you, Dr. John. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks so much, Rosalind. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So let's dive right in. We are going to be talking about men. And the best question I could start with is, how do we begin to understand how men think?
I think it's a great question. I think that to do so, we have to go back a little bit, let's say 50, 60 years to the 1970s, where women began to get into the workforce and they gained more financial freedom, they gained more political power. And at that point, marriage tended to really transform itself radically. And prior to that point, marriage had always been really a financial agreement where the men were the providers, women generally were staying at home, taking care of the kids. In the 70s, that changed dramatically. And with those changes, I think the women's expectations of a partner changed dramatically too. So women were no longer, prior to that, we were a good husband if we were a good provider, didn't drink too much, didn't do drugs, and didn't abuse anyone. After that, the job definition really changed to women want someone that's sympathetic, supportive, emotionally aware, empathetic. They want a lifelong romantic partner. And so their expectations really changed. The problem was no one told us men that the job definition changed. So it kind of caught us by surprise. And the other problem is the way that we're socialized. So we're socialized to not really be very good in relationship, to not really be very good in communication, to not be that skilled at emotional awareness. And partly because the way we're socialized is anytime we show too much sadness or fear, someone will insult us and put us back in that man box, don't be a sissy, don't be a little girl. And if we show too much excitement or fear, too much excitement, romanticism, or love, someone will typically insult us and say, stop being so gay. And, forgive the slurs, but that's how men are typically socialized. And it creates this environment where the only thing that we can really safely feel or express is anger to some extent. I think you could probably add stress and perhaps lust in there, but we really become emotionally restricted.
Wow. I totally agree with what you're saying. And the fact that it must be very hard for men to suddenly be getting mixed messages about they should be changing, they should be doing things differently, but no one really told them how and what. And our culture hasn't totally evolved in the same way as some of us have. So we really do put men in what you call a man box. I like that term. So how does the man box cultural impact, the man box culture that you're talking about, how does that impact men with regards to relationships?
Well, I think that, from what we've seen in research is that from a really early age, like 2 or 3, definitely before kindergarten, little boys are already starting to shut down their use of emotional language. And usually there's a, bigger, stronger boy in the group saying something like, stop being a girl, don't act like a
Mm-hmm.
girl. And so we learn quickly to shut down certain aspects of ourselves. And then the way that develops is, about the age of 12, and this is research by Niobe Way, I believe. And she said that she found that at the age of 12, young boys will typically have a best friend, and they'll typically be effusive in their description of him. Oh my gosh, I love my best friend. I don't know how I could survive without him. Then you get to be a freshman in high school around 14 or 15, and best friends tend to go away. And we have friends, but we're really concerned with 2 goals at the age of, once we get to that high school age, we're concerned with don't be feminine and don't be gay. And, those really guide our development at that point. And it really puts a kink in how we develop in terms of our relational awareness, because we're not encouraged to be relational. We're not encouraged to be emotionally aware. So when we get into a relationship with a woman, the biggest complaint I hear from women that are, in their 40s and 50s is where are all the emotionally aware men? Where are the men that can communicate with me? Where are the men that can validate how I feel? Well, we have no experience doing that. We've never been encouraged or asked to do that. In fact, just the opposite. We've been put down and shamed for doing that in the past. And so I think that, one of the things to consider is, as a woman, is to consider that you might be in the driver's seat, so to speak, in relationship, and you might have to help your man along and teach him some of these relational skills, teach him how to be more emotionally aware if he's open to that sort of discussion.
Yes. And it's so true that women are oblivious to this reality because we are so immersed in emotion and expressing feelings that we can't fathom that men can't and don't. And we're not also aware of how strong that man box culture about being afraid of being labeled gay or feminine in some way is for so many men, so that we have unrealistic expectations. I remember when I was much younger, wanting my man to be like my best girlfriend, so I could confide in him and he could share my sorrows and give me a shoulder to cry on. And it just wasn't coming from any men I dated, or from my first husband. And that was something that I was not aware of, that it wasn't just innate for men to have, because I assumed men were just like women. Boy, was that a big mistake.
Well, and it's difficult, to your point. I mean, I think we're being asked to be masculine and to be assertive and even aggressive at times. And then we're also being asked to be supportive and to validate feelings. And, there's a big piece there that's missing for us. I mean, I remember, in my current relationship, I'm with a therapist now. We've been together 3.5 years. And I really had to practice just validating how she was feeling and getting out of that typical male response of fixing.
Yes.
Solving the problem. And so one of the questions that I teach my male clients to ask their female partners now is, hey, sweetheart, I can see you're really upset right now. What is it you need from me? Do you want me to just listen? Do you want a hug? Or do you want me to try and fix it? Because if we know the answer to that, then, we've got a good shot at helping, being supportive. One of the other problems, though, even once you get that question down, is I've talked to a lot of men who really, really struggle with sitting with uncomfortable emotions. So it's really hard for us to sit there and listen when our loved one is feeling some sort of uncomfortable emotion. If they're crying, if they're sad, if they're upset, we don't like that. It makes us feel lousy inside, and we want to fix that. So I've tried to get my male clients to just sit with it, breathe, and listen, and not do really anything other than listen actively. And that's hard for us.
Yes, I understand that. And I love that question that you're having them answer, because if they're able to ask that, how do you want me to respond? How can I help you? Without being specific about fixing it, it keeps the communication open. and it allows women to be more specific about what they really are looking for.
Mhm.
So related to that, tell us a little bit more about how women play into the man box culture, because we definitely are part of the problem.
Well, yeah, it's interesting in that I think, you know, I like talking about it as the man box culture, and that's not my term. That actually comes originally from Paul Kivel, who was doing work in Oakland with some domestic violence groups. And this man box culture is so pervasive and so widespread, and it's been there for so long that I think men and women are socialized into it. We buy into it, and we're not even realizing that it's a learned identity, that it's something that we can get a little bit of distance between ourselves and this learned identity, and just look at, what am I doing? What are my expectations in terms of the men around me? And how am I playing into it? Because I've talked with, for instance, like I had a high school client, I don't know, a few months ago, and we were talking about this man box culture. And he said, yeah, you know, it's funny, like I even get put into the man box from girls my age. He said he had a girlfriend and he was, you know, kind of breaking down and tearing up over an emotional event. And the girl said to him, stop being such a pussy.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, the more we can talk about this without judgment, the more we can be aware of it, the more we can take steps to interrupt it and correct it.
Absolutely. I heard a stand-up comedian whose whole approach is talking about this, about the pressure on him growing up as a boy and a young man to fit into that man box culture. And the worst thing that could happen to him is anyone implying or calling him feminine in any way, so that every move he made, every decision he made was based on that, making sure none of the guys in his group were going to point the finger and call him names. And it put an enormous pressure on him. And he was a very funny comedian, but I felt such an emotional pathos for him when I started listening to these stories he's telling about life based on true examples of the pressure that he was under. And so many men must be feeling that and being silent because it is what it is.
Yeah, and one of the things I started speaking out was partly for that reason, to give women more compassion for what their men have gone through and how they've been socialized, so that they can be a little bit more patient with us and understand a little bit better. Yeah, I think it puts us in a difficult bind where I like this idea of masculinity being a negative identity. In other words, we're told a lot of what not to be and what not to do, but we're not taught what to do typically. And so we're always kind of on this treadmill of proving ourselves in terms of our last success. And if we don't have a success, that masculine identity can often be pretty fragile and crumble. And, you know, we get depressed or irritable or start drinking or doing drugs. And it swallows a lot of men. It's a really difficult bind to be in at times.
I definitely feel a lot of compassion for men, and I've raised a son to be a wonderful young man, and was always trying to keep him balanced between being the guy that he wants to be with the guys and also being more aware of how women felt and being more compassionate about the kinds of things that women experience, so that he would be a responsible man and someone that a woman would be happy to have in his life. And I know there's a tremendous pressure that men are experiencing in our culture. So thank you so much for the work you are doing, because it's so needed.
Oh, thank you very much.
I want to take a break right now, and we will be right back. You're listening to Dr. John Schinnerer with WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, we are back. This is Rosalind Sedaka, founder of the Child-Centered Divorce Network, and you are listening to Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living with Rosalind Sedaka on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. And we've been talking to Dr. John Schinnerer, who is the coach, especially for men in all facets of life, but we're talking about relationships with women today. And you can learn more about Dr. John at guidetoself.com. So I wanted to bring up a huge question, an issue that men and women have been dealing with since the beginning of time, and that's how anger comes into play for men.
Okay, so again, kind of going back to how we're socialized, because we have, I would say, 2/3 of the emotional spectrum cut off from us. So we can't show too much sadness or fear. We can't show too much excitement, joy, love, typically. So a lot of our emotions get funneled into anger or some degree of anger, irritability, frustration, rage, annoyance, and guilt, embarrassment, anxiety, sadness, they all tend to come out as irritability. I mean, even depression in men comes out as irritability. And I think that part of what I've seen, there's a book by Michael Kimmel called Angry White Men. And part of the anger that we see is men, typically in rural areas of the United States, that feel that they were promised something, the American dream, that if they worked hard, if they were good people, they would be able to afford their own house, they would be able to have their wife stay at home and take care of the kids. And because they feel those promises were broken, they're very, very upset. And I think the women that they're with are often very upset too. So I think the anger's overdetermined, which means that there's a lot of causes that go into anger in a relationship. I think, as I said earlier, that the masculine identity can be fragile. So when things go wrong for men, it's easy for us to get down on ourselves, to feel shame and self-loathing, which tends to come out as irritability and anger.
Yes. And it's something that obviously I'm in the world of divorce, and it's something that we experience, especially when couples are not getting along, and then they're dealing with conflict, and then they're trying to create some sanity around the relationship if children are involved and there's co-parenting involved. And anger is one of the most toxic expressions of and emotions that can create a lot of havoc in that experience. And go ahead.
So I was going to say that one of the dynamics of anger that always fascinates me is, if I'm angry, it's really easy for me to externalize blame, which means that if I'm angry at you, it's all your fault in my perception. And so if you get into a relationship and you get a lot of anger going on, it can become quite destructive, because the angry person will just externalize blame onto their partner. And if I'm the angry person, there's no need for me to look at myself. I haven't done anything wrong, because anger can always justify itself.
Yes.
And one of the things that I talk to couples about is, people that have been together for some period of time, 4, 5, 6, 7 years or longer, we tend to get these gradual accumulations of resentments and hurts, and they don't have to be big. A lot of times marriages end not because of a huge transgression like an affair, but these gradual accumulations of slights and hurts and resentments. And what happens is, whereas when you first got together, there was this perception that your partner was all good, that their intentions were pure, that they were trying to do the right thing. Then you get over time, these gradual accumulation of resentments. And somewhere along the line, that perception shifts. And it goes from, you're all good, you're trying to do right, to, I'm not sure I trust this person, I'm not sure of their intention. And it goes from positive to a negative interpretation. And so one of the things you can do about that is be aware of it and consciously try to flip it back to a positive, simply by assuming positive intent on the part of your partner.
Yes. And that's so important in preventing marital breakups, if one can do that. We also go into relationships with unrealistic expectations. So sometimes we put our partners on a pedestal that's so unrealistic that once we see them as human beings, warts and all, we're disillusioned by the person we selected. And they never had a chance because they were not the person, the real human being that we thought we were falling in love with. Do you find that?
I think you're absolutely on point. Yeah, I think realistic expectations are part of it. I think it's interesting to me because I think there is some truth in that old saying that, you know, going into a relationship, women expect that they can change their man, and men are looking for their woman to not change.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. The other thing that I was thinking about as we were talking is the idea of trauma, which is, this is a topic that's come up for me recently. And I think that our traumas that come up, especially if you're talking about a second marriage or a relationship, you know, that comes up when you're 30, 40, 50 years old, and you've been kicked around a little bit by life, trauma can sometimes come into the relationship and play a part as well without any conscious awareness. So let me give you a little example. My girlfriend went recently to Ecuador to do a volunteer trip, and she was in the Amazon. So there was no access to her by phone for a week.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed as the week went on, I started getting increasingly irritable that she was gone. And I thought, what's going on there? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. This isn't rational, right? This is emotional. And I had to go back and look at what happened in my past when I was a kid. And I realized that my parents used to leave quite a bit and go on trips of a week or 2 weeks when I was little. And some things happened during those trips that might be considered traumatic. And so I realized that I had this thought of, if you love me, you won't leave me, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so at a deep level, there was a little bit of trauma going on there that was coming out in sort of, I don't know, undesirable emotional reactions. And so by looking at that, I can get a better handle on what exactly is going on here emotionally.
Yes. So a lot of these things happened on both genders, and they're just relationship issues that we need to bring enlightenment to, bring awareness to, so that we can work on ourselves without just spending our relationship pointing fingers at our partners.
Mm-hmm.
But talk a little bit more about what suggestions you have for women who are looking for their Mr. Right, who are looking for their ideal partner, because I'm coaching women constantly who are going into relationships, again, with unrealistic expectations and with an unclear understanding of what they can even expect from a partner.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question. And I think one of the ways that I typically go with that is anytime you're dating, I would go into it with what's the top 5 must-have things that are on your list? And what are the top 5, let's say, deal killers? So I think you want to be really clear in terms of what it is you're looking for. For me, it was things like integrity, emotional balance, communication, caring. And I see a lot of people go into dating and they don't have a really clear expectation of what it is they want. I think a lot of times we just go in thinking, oh my God, I found someone that likes me. Whew. And that's as far as the criteria goes.
Or who is really good looking.
Yeah. And to me, you know, the looks and the fitness level or physical body, like, that's the easy part to me. To find someone that you're physically attracted to is relatively easy. To find someone that you're physically attracted to that has integrity, that can communicate, that has
Yes.
emotional awareness, that's a bigger challenge. And I think it's also a worthy challenge to pursue.
I totally agree with you. So before we move any further, I wanted to give you an opportunity to let people know where they can find you.
Oh, thank you very much, Rosalind. So you can find me at guidetoself.com. I'm also on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman. And I'm going to be coming out with my own podcast here sometime this week, May 29th.
Oh, how wonderful.
Also called The Evolved Caveman.
Right. That's great.
So
really you're getting male clients who are getting your message and are eager to learn more and to work with you so that they can make their own lives better. It's not just women, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting to me because my private practice is so packed at this point that I'm actually limiting the number of clients that I see so I can do more things online to reach more people.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, let me ask you one more question about the sort of masks that men wear, because women notice that so often.
Yeah, and I think that goes about, again, back to how we're socialized, that we learn to put on these masks to protect ourselves. So that, I mean, most of the men that I talk to hate to be embarrassed, hate to be humiliated. We don't even like to be judged negatively. So we try and limit the emotions that we show. And we wear a lot of masks. And the fun, you know, I've thought a lot about this in terms of what is masculinity and what are some of the aspects of masculinity if we break it down. Because when I was younger, let's say in high school, I thought of masculinity as the epitome of masculinity was the 6'3", 220-pound guy that played football. You know, he was good looking, he got girls, and that was the extent of it.
Yes.
So physical strength, good looking, athletic. And you know, as I got older, I was like, well, what about intellect? Is intellect part of masculinity? And, you know, what about emotional awareness? What about communication and so on? But to get back to your masks question, we wear masks in order to protect ourselves. I mean, I think that there's a number of masks we wear, one of which is like the provider. So we want to be a provider for the family. And I was thinking about these traits, and I think if you break them down on a 1 to 10 scale, any of them are problematic at either end of that spectrum. So if you're a provider, for example, and you're a 10 on a scale of thinking of yourself as a provider, you can become a workaholic. You can spend 80 to 100 hours a week at the office and neglect your family, which is ultimately the reason why you're working in the first place. Aggression is another mask we wear. And again, if you look at that on a 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being under assertive, 5 being assertive, 10 being aggressive, you know, that can, if you're overly aggressive, that can get you into trouble, leading to, you know, at younger ages, fist fights. It can lead to divorce later on. Self-reliance is another mask that we wear. Because men are taught to be invulnerable and self-reliant, that leads to problems down the road too. Because I had a friend growing up, and he was so self-reliant that he actually pulled his own teeth out in the garage with a pair of pliers when they were rotting. You know, like he didn't want to go to the dentist. So he's like, I'm just going to take care of this myself. Well, you know, so we can get self-destructive if we're too self-reliant too. We also, many of the men that I talk to aren't aware of what they need, and they haven't learned how to ask for what they need as a result of learning to be self-reliant so well. And so, you know, again, a lot of these things are good to an extent, but if you take them too far, they become problematic.
So we're dealing with a very serious reality that's hugely expansive throughout our culture. And you're seeing this percent of people in your practice. Sorry about that. What do we do to get the word out so that more men can hold up their hands and begin to even understand the conversation, so that we can make some inroads and dialogue between both genders?
Well, I think there is a movement that's underway right now. I think, you know, I think of it as sort of positive masculinity. I think that conversations like this are very valuable. I see more and more of conversations like this going on. I think that to the extent we can have conversations about these topics in a non-judgmental and curious way, that's effective. Pardon me. And so I see more and more men's groups springing up to support men, and they're helping get the word out to women that perhaps women have a leg up in relationship because of how they're socialized compared to how we're socialized. And so I think just continuing to allow the conversation to evolve it, for more people to listen to it with an open mind, I think we're all going to benefit from that.
Well, definitely that will be the case, that we'll all benefit the more we can talk about it. Do you have a last takeaway, real quick takeaway for everyone who's listening? Because this has been a wonderful conversation, so much value.
Yeah, I think that, you know, typically what I do when I start off with a client is I'll share with them a very simple framework. And the framework is, you're familiar with past, present, future. And it took a very smart man at Stanford, Philip Zimbardo, to add positive and negative to that. Pardon me.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's positive past, positive future, positive past, positive present, positive future, negative past, negative present, negative future. And it's a really simple framework to overlay on your mind and ask, what is your mind trying to do to you right now? Where is it trying to take you? And do you want to be there? Because a lot of this has to do with awareness, because we are creatures of habit. And if we're not aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it, then we're a slave to that habit. And I find a lot of us go through lives as automatons on autopilot,
Yes.
with just very little awareness. So to me, the first step for my clients is always increasing awareness.
Yes. Well, I totally agree. And thank you so much for the wonderful work you were doing. It's very important work. And I hope our listeners will visit you at guidetoself.com and spread the word, let other people know about the work you're doing. And we look forward to learning more about your podcast.
Thank you so much, Rosalind. I enjoyed being here.
So we've been listening to Dr. John Schinnerer, and I want to thank you for joining us today. As always, this is Rosalind Sadaka with the Child-Centered Divorce Network. You are listening to WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network, and the show is Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living with Rosalind Sadaka. Hope you'll join us again. Bye-bye for now.